Okay, welcome to this revision video on Helmsley Castle, history around us. This video talks about the history of the first castle in the 1120s and Walter Espec. Okay, so a little bit of background to Helmsley Castle. This, as you can see here in the extract from the Bayeux Tapestry, shows us Count Robert of Mortain. He was the half-brother of William, Duke of Normandy, and he was granted the lands around Helmsley after the Norman conquest of 1066. And here he's pictured in the Bayeux Tapestry having dinner at Pevensey, along with his brother Odo and William, Duke of Normandy. And Robert and Odo both fought for William at the Battle of Hastings. So just a little bit of background history about Helmsley before the castle as we know it was built. There is evidence, certainly in prehistoric times, of round barrows, mounds of earth over a burial place that can be found in the countryside, which suggests that people have lived in this area for a very long time. A hoard of Roman coins from the early 3rd century were found in Helmsley in 1931. There are even remains of a large Roman villa at Bedlam nearby. Near Helmsley Church, there's also a Scandinavian tomb. Now, in Norman times, the land around Helmsley was actually laid waste during the harrying of the north, and the manor of Helmsley was given to Count Robert of Mortain, who we've just found out about, the half-brother of William the Conqueror. Now, we don't have any evidence of a castle being built at this time, so we don't know whether Robert de Mortain built a castle. If he did, not much of it survived, and we can't really say much about what that castle would have been like. Now, after 1088, Robert de Mortain lost the estate after he rebelled against King William II in 1088. And although the estate was restored to his son, William de Mortain, he lost the land when he rebelled against King Henry I, who ruled from 1100 to 1135. And there's just a reminder of those first three English monarchs, William I, William II, and Henry I. Okay, so in terms of the background to the building of Helmsley Castle, one of the key historical questions to ask is, did Robert de Mortain build a castle? After all, many castles were built in the wake and the aftermath of the Norman conquest. The answer to this question is that a lack of sources means that we simply don't know, and that's one of the challenges of actually studying Helmsley Castle. There's no actual physical evidence that we can find that Robert de Mortain built a castle, but if he had established a castle, he may have built a motte and bailey castle to control the local population. It would have been a ringwork style castle with a simple ditch and rampart enclosure with a timber tower. But we can guess that even if he did build a castle, it was pretty insignificant and didn't survive and didn't mean that people wrote about it, etc. Now, in terms of the source of the Domesday Book in 1086, Helmsley is recorded as having land of up to 6 ploughs and 1.5 leagues of arable and pasture land. Robert de Mortain lost the land in 1088 because he plotted to overthrow King William II, and the land was given to the crown. Now, we don't know much about what happened between 1088 and 1120, and again, there's a lack of source evidence there. Again, one of the challenges of studying Helmsley Castle. But in 1120, the land was granted to Walter Espec by King Henry I, most probably due to reward for his military abilities as an army commander. Now, Walter Espec died 1153, 1154. The sources are a little bit divided on that, but around that time, and he was an important military figure in the reign of Henry I, and we can probably make an assumption that he built Helmsley Castle to control his lands in the north and to show off his military skills. So Walter Espec had estates throughout Yorkshire and the north. He also had another castle in Northumberland that was known as Wark Castle, and Helmsley was located at the centre of them, so it was almost like his base to control his lands in the north. Now, whilst the castle was being built, Espec led English forces to defeat the Scots at the Battle of the Standard in Northallerton on the 22nd of August, 1138. So that first castle was built between 1120 and 1150, set within the landscape to demonstrate Walter's power, especially through hunting. The area to the west, south and southwest all had parkland around it, and it was used for hunting, and that tradition of that land being used for hunting continues later on with the De Roos family as well. Now, in terms of the features of the first castle, we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a moment, but there was no central motte strong point, so this makes it quite atypical of other castles like Pickering Castle, for example. Its distinctive feature was the great rectangular earthworks, the double ditch earthworks, supporting the first castle, which are made from timber and some stone, and that explains why hardly any of it remains. So the only site evidence that we have of Walter Espec's castle that we can physically see at Helmsley today are the distinctive earthworks and one remaining wall which divided the two baileys, the only parts of Espec's castle where we can see physical remains today, and that wall is between, can see little bits of it between the East Tower and the West Tower today. So let's just talk about who Walter Espec was as an individual. So he controlled much of northern England and he held many royal positions, including being a royal justiciar, which meant that he was able to administer the king's justice in the north. He was granted land around Helmsley around about early 1120s, 1120, 1122 perhaps, and he built the castle at the centre of his Yorkshire estate. Now, Walter Espec was a highly religious man. He used his wealth to found nearby Kirkham Abbey around about 1122, Revo Abbey around about 1132, and then an abbey further away called Warden Abbey in 1136. He also built Wark Castle, which is an early 12th century Mortain Bailey castle at the centre of his Northumbrian estate. So we're building a picture here of a powerful man who had a great deal of influence and great deal of military prowess, and that's further reinforced by the fact that he fought against the Scots at the Battle of Standard at Northallerton in 1138 in his position as the High Sheriff of Yorkshire. So again, somebody that was there to administer and represent the king and served under a couple of kings, both King Henry I and also King Stephen. Now, in later years, he retired to Revo Abbey, where he reportedly became a Cistercian monk, and that's where he died. So we can guess that this area of Yorkshire was really important to Walter Espec, and he decided that he wanted to live around here, so that perhaps gives us a clue about why he built the castle in this particular part of the world. Walter Espec had no heirs, so the castle was passed to his sister's husband, Peter de Roos, on his death, and by 1157 Peter's son Robert was in possession of the castle. So in terms of how that first castle was used, it was the main domestic residence for Walter Espec. He dominated Helmsley, he acted as lord of the manor, administering justice in the local area, but also a significant figure nationally, certainly within the whole of the north. He would have entertained people with hunting in the lands around the castle as well. So in the History Around Us paper, it's really important to use both site evidence and also source evidence within your answers. So there's a couple of really good historical sources here about Walter Espec. So I'm just going to read them to you, and you can maybe try and remember some of the quotes from it. And Walter Espec was there, a man old and full of years, with a sharp nature, wise in counsel, moderate in peace, prudent in war, serving comrades with friendship, kings with good faith. He was immensely tall, with all his limbs of unparalleled size, but matching his height. To black hair, a long beard, an open and bold blow, large and penetrating eyes, a full yet drawn face, and a voice like a trumpet. Eloquence, which came easy to him, brought on certain majesty of sound. And there's a few phrases I really like there. So the phrases like immensely tall, limbs of unparalleled size, and voice like a trumpet really give that description that this was a really powerful and forceful individual, and that can therefore allow us to draw some conclusions about why he might have built Helmsley Castle in terms of projecting his own sense of power and authority, and also his sort of military credentials as well. Now here we have a reported speech from Walter Espec to his English troops before the Battle of Standard in 1138 at Northallerton. It is not purposeless, most strong men, for you youngsters to listen to an old man. I have learnt from the fickleness of many times, from changes of kings and from the varying fortunes of wars, to reflect on the past and assess the present from the past, the future from the present. If all who hear me knew and understood and foresaw our fortune today, I should willingly stay at home and rest in my sleep, or play with dice, or contend with chessmen, or, if those things seem unfitting for my time of life, I should devote myself to the labour of reading histories, or, as is my wont, lend an alternative ear to a teller of the deeds of our ancestors. So again, we sort of see those leadership skills and that authority of Walter Espec. Okay, so let's just have a think about this first castle at Helmsley. It would have been built in wood largely. The location was selected on a rocky ridge. It was cut off with earth ramparts and ditches. The ramparts were probably topped with a timber palisade, as you can see on that artistic interpretation. There were probably two rectangular baileys, one north and one south, each with a double ditch, divided into two by a curtain wall with a ditch. Now that the footings of that wall survive, running under the later West Tower towards the 13th century chapel. So that's how those two baileys would have been divided, and we can kind of make an assumption that the castle was on a similar sort of footprint to how it is nowadays. There was a gateway to the north. Part of the outer wall of the chamber block may also date from this date as well. Uniquely, the castle had no central mound as the main stronghold in the centre, and that is very untypical, unlike Pickering Castle, which is a much more traditional Mortain Bailey castle. The southwest and the southeast of the castle are enclosed as private parkland for the lord to hunt, and that gives us an important clue into the use of the castle. The closest area of land used for hunting was called La Haye. Now, we don't have loads of source evidence about that first castle, but a really useful source we have is a 12th century sermon by Abbot Ealred of Rievaulx Abbey. And as Rievaulx was only 3 miles from Helmsley, we can probably guess that the castle, Helmsley Castle, had inspired his words. And this is what he said in his sermon. 3 things make a castle strong: a moat, a wall, and a tower. First the moat, then the wall rising above the moat, and finally the tower, which is stronger and more significant than the other 2. And that's a really useful source to allow us to draw some conclusions about what that first castle was like. Now, in terms of site evidence, the distinctive earthworks of Walter Espec's castle and the double ditch moat are a key feature of that castle. The earthworks may even predate Walter Espec, but they were a key feature of his castle, and the earth excavated from the ditches was used to construct the ramparts. And we get a really good view from that picture, and that's what we're talking about in terms of using site evidence of what the earthworks at Helmsley were like. So it's a really important feature of Walter Espec's castle. Okay, so there you have it. We've learned about Walter Espec and Robert de Mortain. Again, that just sets it into context in terms of where this fits in with the rest of the history of Helmsley Castle. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.